Hey guys, tonight we're stepping away from the usual kings and castles, the epic battles and crumbling empires, and instead we're venturing into a landscape that's vast, sun-baked, and utterly bizarre. You're settling in, maybe wrapped in your favorite blanket, the soft glow of your screen reflecting in your eyes, and you're transported to the endless, shimmering plains of Western Australia. You can almost feel the dry, warm air on your skin, smell the red dust, and hear the distant, unsettling calls of, well, you'll find out soon enough. This isn't the history you learned in school, tucked neatly into textbooks. This is the kind of story that makes you tilt your head and wonder, did that really happen? And trust me, it did. This is a tale of hubris, feathered foes, and a military campaign that, well, let's just say it didn't quite go according to plan. It's a conflict so strange, so uniquely Australian, that it sounds like something out of a fever dream. You might think you know history, but trust me, you probably won't survive this particular historical rabbit hole with your conventional understanding of warfare intact. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure, just a gentle nudge. And if you want to share where you're tuning in from, drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far these quiet little journeys reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You close your eyes for just a second, inhale deeply, and when you open them again, the world has changed. You are standing in Western Australia, sometime in late 1932. The air is thick with the smell of dry earth and eucalyptus. The sun beats down relentlessly, turning the sky a pale, washed-out blue. Around you, the landscape stretches out, flat and seemingly endless, dotted with sparse scrub and the occasional tough, resilient tree. This is farming country, or at least it was meant to be farming country. After the First World War, the Australian government, in a move that seemed logical at the time, encouraged returning soldiers to take up farming land out here. The idea was noble. Give these men a chance to build a new life, contribute to the growing nation, and turn vast tracts of land into productive agricultural areas. You can imagine the optimism, the dreams of prosperity etched onto the faces of these former soldiers as they arrived ready to trade their rifles for plows. They cleared the land, they sowed their wheat, and they waited for the harvest. But nature, as it often does, had other plans. And these plans involved a rather large, flightless bird with a penchant for mass migration and a seemingly insatiable appetite for grain. You see them now, on the horizon. At first, just a shimmer in the heat haze. Then they resolve into shapes, dark and fast-moving. More of them, and more. A wave, a living tide flowing over the land. They are emus, Dromaeus novaeholendiae, large native birds, second only to the ostrich in height. Normally, they roam the outback, following the rains, living their best bird lives. But this year, the rains had been good inland, leading to a population boom. Now, with the breeding season over, tens of thousands of them are migrating towards the coast, drawn by the promise of water and the irresistible sight of freshly sown wheat fields. You watch them as they descend upon a farmer's field. It's not just the eating, although they do that with impressive efficiency. They also trample the crops with their large, powerful feet, flattening stalks, breaking fences, and generally causing feathered chaos. For the farmers, many of whom are still finding their feet after the war, this is devastating. Their livelihoods, their hopes, are being literally run into the ground by birds. You hear the farmers talking, their voices strained with frustration and desperation. They tried everything they could think of, building stronger fences, The emus just pushed through or found gaps, even trying to cull them themselves, but with limited success against such large, fast-moving targets. The problem is simply too big, too overwhelming for individual efforts. So, the farmers did what people do when they're desperate and feel ignored. They appealed to the government. They needed help. They needed something, or someone, to deal with this feathered plague. And the government, perhaps wanting to be seen as responsive, perhaps underestimating the challenge, agreed to help. This is where the story takes its first truly surreal turn. The government didn't send agricultural experts or pest controllers, though arguably that might have been a better idea. No, they decided the problem required a more direct approach. They decided to send the military. You hear the rumble of trucks in the distance, the arrival of soldiers, not just any soldiers, but men equipped with machine guns. Yes, you heard that right. Machine guns. To fight birds. It sounds like a Monty Python sketch, doesn't it? Like something someone made up as a joke. But this is history, folks, and sometimes history has a truly wicked sense of humor. The military detachment arrives, led by Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery. You see him now, a figure of authority in a slightly dusty uniform, surveying the scene. He has 2 soldiers with him, and they are armed with Lewis guns, light machine guns that saw plenty of action in the trenches of Europe. These are serious weapons, designed to stop charging infantry, not birds. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine military operation or more of a government-funded pest control exercise with military personnel and equipment involved. Was it a political stunt to show the government was doing something? Was there a genuine belief that machine guns were the most efficient way to deal with the problem? Or was it simply a case of, we have these resources, let's use them? You might ponder this yourself as you watch the scene unfold. The plan, as far as there was one, seemed simple enough. Drive the emus into a trap, or at least into a concentrated area, and then open fire with the machine guns. Easy, right? Birds aren't exactly known for their tactical prowess. They don't build fortifications or lay ambushes. What could possibly go wrong? You feel a sense of anticipation mixed with disbelief. This is really happening. A military unit, armed with machine guns, is preparing to engage an army of emus. It feels less like a war and more like a very strange, very high-stakes hunting trip, orchestrated by someone who maybe had a few too many Fosters. Yes, I know Fosters isn't that popular in Australia, but it's a classic joke, okay? Let me have this. The soldiers position themselves. They are ready. The emus, perhaps sensing a change in the air or maybe just continuing their relentless march towards food and water, continue to approach. You see their heads bobbing, their long necks stretching. They look like large birds. Not exactly intimidating in the way a charging enemy soldier would be, but there are so many of them, thousands upon thousands. A feathered horde. A quirky tidbit you might not know. Emus can run surprisingly fast, reaching speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, or about 31 miles per hour. And they are surprisingly resilient. Their feathers provide a kind of natural armor, and they have a somewhat erratic, unpredictable way of running, zigzagging and scattering when startled. This isn't going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. It's going to be something else entirely. The order is given. The machine guns open fire. The sound of the machine guns. It hangs in the air for a moment. A sharp, metallic ripping sound against the vast, indifferent quiet of the Australian bush. You hear it echo. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, it begins to fade. The dust, kicked up by the commotion, hangs like a veil, shimmering in the harsh sunlight before beginning its slow descent back to the parched earth. You squint through the haze, shielding your eyes with your hand, and you look out across the landscape. The emus, well, they're still there. Not all of them, perhaps. Some shapes lie still, dark lumps against the pale ground. But many more are scattering, their long legs carrying them away in that peculiar, slightly awkward yet surprisingly fast gait. They zigzag, they fan out, they melt back into the scrub. This wasn't the neat, decisive victory anyone had perhaps envisioned. It wasn't a quick fix. It was messy and far from over. To truly understand why anyone thought deploying military machine guns against a flock of large, flightless birds was a reasonable course of action, and, oh yes, they absolutely did, you need to step back. Not just from this dusty field where the first shots have just echoed, but from this specific moment in time. You need to let your mind drift back a little, through the years, through the dust and the heat, to a different kind of struggle that was defining Australia in the period leading up to this peculiar conflict. You find yourself now drifting, settling gently into Australia after World War I. The Great War, the war to end all wars, is over. The soldiers are coming home. Imagine the relief, the parades, the tearful reunions. But also, imagine the challenges. Thousands of young men, many of whom had never farmed a day in their lives, returning to a country eager to reward their service. The government, in a well-intentioned but perhaps slightly optimistic move, initiated ambitious soldier settlement schemes. The idea was noble. Give these returned servicemen a piece of land, help them become farmers, build a strong agricultural future for the nation. It sounds good on paper, doesn't it? Like planning a massive group project where everyone just magically knows what they're doing from day one. Spoiler alert, reality is usually less cooperative than a PowerPoint presentation. You see the land they were given. Much of it is out here in Western Australia. Vast tracts of country that look beautiful in a rugged, untamed way, but are inherently challenging. The soil is often poor, the rainfall unpredictable and scarce. This isn't the lush, easy farming land you might picture. This is tough, unforgiving country. You feel the dry heat radiating up from the ground, see the heat haze shimmer on the horizon, distorting the shapes of distant gum trees. You hear the drone of cicadas, a constant high-pitched buzz that seems to amplify the silence around it. You walk among the scattered, nascent farms, small, often rudimentary houses built by determined hands. Fences being put up, sometimes poorly, sometimes barely holding together. Fields being cleared, the tough native scrub giving way slowly, reluctantly, to wheat. Wheat was king, or at least they hoped it would be. The global market was complicated. These farmers, these returned servicemen, are tough. They've seen horrors far worse than a bit of dry earth and a stubborn fence post. But they are often inexperienced. They lack capital. They lack the deep generational knowledge of farming this specific, difficult land. And they are vulnerable to forces far beyond their control. As the 1920s draw to a close and the early 1930s dawn, a new, crushing weight settles over the world. The Great Depression. You feel the economic chill even here, thousands of miles from the financial hubs where it began. The price of wheat, the very crop these farmers are staking their livelihoods on, plummets. It falls and falls until the cost of harvesting and transporting the grain is sometimes more than the grain itself is worth. Imagine working your fingers to the bone all year, battling the weather, the pests, the isolation, only to find out your entire harvest is essentially worthless. It's a gut punch you can almost feel yourself. You see the worry etched on the faces of the farmers, the unpaid bills piling up, the growing sense of desperation. This economic catastrophe is a mainstream historical fact that shaped the lives of millions, including the struggling farmers in the Australian bush. Their dreams of a prosperous life on the land, earned through their wartime service, are turning into a nightmare of debt and hardship. And then, adding insult to grievous injury, came the birds, the emus. You might think of them as just big birds, maybe a bit goofy looking with their long necks and shaggy feathers. But out here, in this specific time and place, they became a force of nature, a feathered plague. Why? Well, several factors converged. The land clearing for farming had, paradoxically, created new attractive habitats for the emus, providing access to water sources, like dams built by the farmers, and of course, vast fields of tasty, ripe wheat. The emus, driven by their own ancient instincts, likely triggered by drought further inland, began to migrate towards these new sources of food and water, and they came in numbers that are frankly staggering. Imagine looking out across your fields, the result of a year of back-breaking work, and seeing not just a few birds, but thousands, 10,000, 20,000. Estimates vary, and historians still argue whether the numbers were truly as high as reported by some panicked farmers. But the visual is undeniable, a brown, feathered tide moving across the landscape. This brings us to a slightly more quirky, fringe tidbit of this era. While the government was trying to settle soldiers and promote wheat farming, they also had to deal with the reality of pests. There were bounties on certain animals, and control measures were sometimes creative. The idea of using military personnel and machine guns wasn't entirely out of the blue in terms of government intervention, but the scale and the target were certainly unique. It's like deciding your garden gnome problem requires a tactical nuclear strike, slightly disproportionate, perhaps. You see the farmers trying everything they can, firing their rifles, often inefficiently, trying to herd the birds away. Imagine trying to herd 20,000 6-foot-tall, fast-running birds. Yeah, good luck with that. Building fences, which the emus often just crashed through or found ways around. The emus were not just eating the crops, they were trampling them, breaking down fences, drinking precious water supplies. They were destroying the very foundations of these struggling farms. You feel the frustration building, the sense of being overwhelmed. These farmers had faced down human enemies on the battlefield, but somehow facing down an army of giant birds feels different, more absurd perhaps, more relentless. It's like dealing with that one neighbor who just will not keep their giant noisy pets off your lawn, except the pets are the size of a small car, and there are thousands of them. The farmers petitioned the government. They pleaded for help. They described the devastation, the sheer impossibility of dealing with this feathered onslaught on their own. The government, facing pressure from these returned servicemen who had already sacrificed so much, felt compelled to act. They needed to do something. And that, my friends, is how you end up in a situation where the Australian government decides the best course of action is to dispatch the military armed with Lewis machine guns to wage war on emus. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. It grew out of this perfect storm of post-war idealism, economic collapse, environmental challenge, and sheer overwhelming avian numbers. You understand now the desperation that led to that first burst of machine gun fire you heard earlier. It was the culmination of years of struggle, hardship, and a growing sense of being utterly besieged, not by a human enemy, but by nature itself. In the form, you stand there, feeling the dry air, hearing the distant buzz of insects, seeing the endless horizon. The stage is set. The players are in place. The struggling farmers, the vast, unforgiving land, the indifferent global economy, and the feathered army. The Great Emu War isn't just a funny historical footnote. It's a bizarre, almost surreal consequence of real human struggles and environmental pressures. And you're right here as it all unfolds. Imagine for a moment stepping back just a little into the boots of one of those returned soldiers. The Great War is over. The trenches, the mud, the unimaginable horror. That chapter is closed. You've come home to a country that, while proud of your service, isn't exactly overflowing with opportunities, at least not the kind that feel like a fresh start, a chance to build something peaceful and new. The government, bless its optimistic heart, has a plan, a grand vision, really. They look out at the vast, empty, or what they perceive as empty, interior of Western Australia, particularly a large swathe of land east of Perth, and they see potential, lots of potential. They see wheat fields stretching to the horizon, a new breadbasket for the nation, a way to boost the economy, and, conveniently, a way to resettle thousands of returning servicemen like you, giving them a purpose, a livelihood, and a stake in the country they fought for. This is the Soldier Settlement Scheme, a significant post-war initiative right across Australia, but particularly ambitious here in the West. The idea is simple, almost poetic in its simplicity. Take the blokes who defended the land and give them a piece of it to cultivate. Turn soldiers into farmers, swords into plowshares, quite literally. So you find yourself, along with thousands of others, signing up. Maybe you dreamed of farming before the war, maybe you didn't. Maybe the brochure just looked really convincing, promising fertile soil, good rainfall, and a supportive government behind you. It's a chance, though, isn't it? A chance to leave the past behind, to work with your hands, to feel the sun on your back instead of the weight of a pack or the chill of a dugout. You pack up what little you have, a few personal effects, maybe a photo or two, the clothes on your back. You say goodbye to family, friends, the familiar comfort of the coast. Then you board a train, heading east, deeper and deeper into the bush. The journey itself is an experience. The train rattles along, the rhythm of the wheels on the track a constant hypnotic beat, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Outside the window, the landscape slowly changes. The coastal scrub gives way to more open country, then to vast stretches of bushland, gum trees, mallee, saltbush. The colors are muted, greens, grays, dusty browns, all bathed in the harsh, bright Australian light. You watch the telephone poles flash by, a thin line connecting you to the world you're leaving behind. The air coming in through the open window is dry and carries the scent of eucalyptus and warm earth. You might share a carriage with other blokes heading to their blocks, their faces a mix of excitement, trepidation, and that quiet, weary look that many brought back from the front. There's a sense of shared destiny, of stepping into the unknown together. Finally, the train slows, hisses to a stop at a tiny siding, little more than a platform in a shed in the middle of nowhere. This is it, your stop. You climb down, your boots crunching on the gravel. The silence is immense, broken only by the retreating sound of the train and the calls of unseen birds. The horizon stretches out in every direction, flat and seemingly infinite. Your block. It's, well, it's land. Lots of it. Acres upon acres, usually around 1,000 acres, sometimes more. But it's not the neat plowed fields you might have imagined. It's bush, thick with trees, undergrowth, rocks. It needs clearing. A lot of clearing. The government promised assistance, of course, a living allowance while you cleared the land and planted your first crop, loans for equipment, seed, and stock. They even provided basic housing materials, or sometimes just a tent initially. It was meant to be a partnership, a helping hand to get you started. But the reality on the ground, it was tough, really tough. The soil wasn't always as fertile as advertised. The rainfall was unpredictable, often too little, sometimes rarely too much, and almost never at the right time. The sheer physical labor of clearing the land was backbreaking. Imagine swinging an axe day after day in the relentless heat, felling trees, digging out stumps, dragging brush. It's a sweat-soaked, muscle-aching, blister-forming kind of existence. You might live in a tent or a rudimentary shack you build yourself, the corrugated iron heating up like an oven in the sun and cooling to near freezing at night. Meals are simple, often repetitive. The nearest neighbor might be miles away, a tiny plume of smoke on the horizon indicating another hopeful soul wrestling with their own patch. Historians still argue whether the soldier settlement scheme was fundamentally flawed from the outset, or if it was a noble idea hampered by poor execution and bad luck. Was the land itself unsuitable? Were the settlers given enough support? Were they equipped with the necessary farming knowledge? It's a complex question with no easy answer, a debate that echoes the struggles faced by the men and women who lived it. One quirky tidbit about this era was the sheer scale of the land clearing. Settlers were often given targets for the amount of land they had to clear each year to keep their lease or meet loan conditions. This led to immense pressure and environmental consequences, but also some ingenious, if sometimes desperate, methods. One method involved linking two powerful tractors, if you were lucky enough to have them, with a massive chain and dragging it between them to pull down swaths of bush. Imagine the noise, the dust, the sheer brute force of it. It was farming on an industrial, slightly terrifying scale, often done with very non-industrial means like your own two hands and a sharp axe. It was definitely not the kind of rustic charm you see on Instagram today. You plant your first wheat crop, usually after a monumental effort to get the land ready. You watch the tiny green shoots emerge from the soil, a fragile symbol of hope and hard work. You tend to them, praying for rain, watching the sky, learning to read the subtle signs of the weather in this unfamiliar landscape. The challenges are immediate and varied. Pests are a constant problem. Rabbits, kangaroos, insects. The isolation can be crushing, especially for families who followed their soldier husbands out here. The markets for your produce are distant, and prices can fluctuate wildly based on global demand, something completely outside your control. It feels a bit like trying to build a sandcastle against a rising tide, doesn't it? You might have a laugh with a neighbor over a cup of tea, if you can get fresh water, about the latest piece of government advice that seems utterly useless in practice, or the sheer absurdity of trying to grow anything in dirt that seems determined to turn back into dust. Well, the bloke in the office seemed confident, he might joke, wiping sweat from your brow. Yeah, honest work that feels suspiciously like being dropped onto Mars with a shovel and told to start a garden. Despite the hardships, there's a resilience, a determination. You put your head down, you work. You have to. Your future, your family's future depends on it. You clear more land, you plant more seed, you hope for that perfect season, that bumper crop that will make all the struggle worthwhile. As the first crops start to ripen, turning that golden color that promises harvest and income, you feel a flicker of optimism. Maybe, just maybe this is going to work. Maybe this vast, quiet land will finally yield its bounty. But you're not the only one interested in that ripening grain. The scent of it carries on the wind, attracting attention from the local inhabitants. Wildlife is abundant here, and while you've dealt with kangaroos nibbling young shoots and rabbits burrowing under fences, another presence is starting to make itself known. They've been around, of course, since you arrived. Tall, feathered figures, often seen in the distance, loping across the plains with that peculiar ground-eating stride. You've mostly ignored them, or perhaps marveled briefly at their size and speed. They seemed like just another part of the wild landscape you were trying to tame. But now, as the wheat heads fill with grain, these feathered figures start to appear closer, in larger numbers. They emerge from the bush, drawing the promise of an easy meal, the emus, and they are looking hungry. The golden stalks sway gently in the breeze, heavy with the promise of harvest. You run a hand over the ripening grain, feeling the plump kernels beneath your fingers. This is it. This is what you worked for, cleared the land for, sweated under the unforgiving sun for. Your future, right here, stretching out across the newly tamed earth. But you aren't alone in appreciating this bounty. At first, it's just a few more, a small mob, maybe a dozen or so, cautiously stepping out of the scrubby bushland at the edge of your property. They eye the fields, heads bobbing with that peculiar, almost comical gait. You shoo them away, maybe throw a rock or two. They scatter easily enough, long legs carrying them swiftly back into the trees. Annoying, yes, but manageable, a minor nuisance in the grand scheme of things. Then the numbers grow. What was a dozen becomes 50. 50 becomes 100. Soon it feels like the bush itself is emptying, releasing a tide of feathered bodies onto your land. They don't approach cautiously anymore. They march. They stream. They arrive with a single-minded focus that chills you slightly, despite the heat. Their eyes, large and dark, seem fixed solely on the shimmering fields of wheat. You stand at the edge of the property line watching them come. They are magnificent creatures in a way. Tall, powerful, built for covering vast distances. You remember seeing them occasionally before, solitary figures or small family groups. Now, this is different. This is an arrival, a migration on a scale you hadn't anticipated. It's like they received a mass text message. Hey, free food buffet at your farm location. Bring your friends. The sound is the first thing that really gets to you. It's not loud individually, but multiplied by hundreds, thousands, it becomes a low, resonant hum. A mix of guttural grunts, soft thumping of feet on dry earth, and the rustle of feathers as they move through the low vegetation. It's relentless. It's everywhere. You wake up to it, you work to it, you try to sleep through it. They pour into the fields. They don't graze politely. They devour. They rip at the grain heads with their strong beaks, swallowing the precious kernels whole. They trample the stalks, knocking down more than they eat. A single emu can do damage, but 1,000? It's like watching a living carpet unroll across your hard work, consuming it before your eyes. The vibrant green and gold of the ripening wheat starts to show patches of brown, flattened earth where the birds have passed. Your fences, painstakingly built to keep livestock in and kangaroos out, are no match. The emus, driven by hunger, simply push through them. Their sheer mass and momentum snap wires, break posts. Gaps appear, and through these gaps more emus stream, followed by rabbits attracted by the flattened crops. It's an ecological chain reaction you never signed up for. Your farm, your sanctuary, feels less like a home and more like a drive-through for hungry, oversized birds. You try to scare them. You yell. You wave your arms. You bang pots and pans. It works, briefly. A section of the mob will scatter, a flurry of long legs and flapping wings, creating a chaotic dust cloud. But they don't go far. They just regroup, eyes still fixed on the prize, and soon they are back, joined by more. It's like playing whack-a-mole, but the moles are 6 feet tall and multiply when you hit them. The drought hasn't helped. The usual sources of food and water in the bush are scarce. This area, the marginal land that you and other returned soldiers were given as part of the soldier settlement scheme after World War I, is particularly vulnerable. The scheme aimed to reward veterans with land and opportunity, turning them into prosperous farmers. A noble idea, perhaps, but one that often placed inexperienced people on difficult land during challenging economic times. This mass migration of emus is likely a desperate search for resources, pushed by the same harsh conditions that make farming here so precarious. Historians still argue whether the primary driver was the drought forcing them out of their usual habitats, or if the newly planted fields of wheat acted as an irresistible magnet, a beacon of easy calories in a lean landscape. All you know is that they are here, and they are eating your livelihood. You see them at the water tank, standing on the edges, dipping their long necks in, drinking deeply. They foul the water, leave droppings everywhere. It's not just the crops, they are impacting your limited water supply too. Every resource you have is under siege. The sheer numbers are overwhelming. You estimate thousands, maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000. It's hard to count when they are constantly moving, blending into the heat haze. They are everywhere you look. In the fields, along the fence lines, even congregating near the farmhouse sometimes, bold and unafraid. They peck at anything shiny, seemingly curious about this strange human habitation that has appeared in their world. One even pecked at your reflection in the window, which was slightly less adorable than a bird hitting a window in a cartoon. The frustration turns to anger, then to a weary sort of despair. You worked so hard. You followed the government's advice. You planted the crops, hoping for a good harvest, a chance to build a life. And now, nature, in the form of a relentless feathered army, is taking it all away. It feels deeply unfair, like signing up for a marathon, training for months, and then having a flock of oversized chickens suddenly appear and start eating the finish line. You talk to your neighbors. They are experiencing the same thing. Their fields are being ravaged, their fences broken. The mood in the small settlement is grim. The initial hope and camaraderie of building a new community are being eroded by this shared, relentless problem. You gather in the evenings, swatting flies, sharing stories of emu encounters that range from the frustrating to the almost unbelievable. One farmer swears he saw an emu trying to dismantle his plow with its beak, though I suspect that might have been slightly exaggerated. Or maybe not. With these birds, who knows? They seem capable of anything when they're hungry.
Mini title: Crops Under Siege. Teaser: these large birds begin systematically destroying your hard-earned crops. And then they arrive, not as a distant spectacle anymore, but as a tangible, immediate threat right on your doorstep, or rather, right at the edge of your fields. You stand there, perhaps by a fence post, the harsh sunlight warming your face, and you watch the wave of feathers and long legs flow over the gentle rise of your land. The sound changes. The distant drumming becomes a closer, more intimate rustling. It's the sound of thousands of bodies moving through the dry grass, a relentless whisper that grows louder with every passing moment. And then they hit the boundary of your meticulously planted wheat fields. Your golden sea, the promise of sustenance, of income, of stability in these uncertain times. You see the first few birds hesitate for just a second, their heads tilting this way and that, assessing the new terrain. It's almost polite, a moment of avian contemplation. And then the floodgate opens. They pour into the field, not in a panicked rush, but with a focused, almost methodical intent. They don't just wander aimlessly. Oh no, these birds, driven by an instinct older than memory and a hunger born of drought, know exactly what they're here for. They spread out, fanning across the rows, their long necks dipping down. You can hear the soft, rhythmic peck, peck, peck as they sample your hard work. You planted this wheat seed by seed, or perhaps with a simple drill, walking behind a horse, the dust billowing up round you. You nurtured it through the dry spells, prayed for rain during the critical weeks, watched it grow from fragile green shoots to sturdy golden stalks heavy with grain. It represents months of back-breaking labor, your entire livelihood, your hope for the future. And now, it's a buffet. It feels deeply personal, like they received a memo that specifically detailed your address and your planting schedule. Operation Wheat Annihilation. You can almost imagine a tiny general emu with a map. It's absurd, yes, but watching it happen, feeling the helplessness claw at your throat, the absurdity doesn't make it any less devastating. It just adds a layer of surreal, dark comedy to your unfolding tragedy. They don't just eat the grain heads, though that's bad enough. They trample the stalks, breaking them low to the ground. They flatten swaths of the field, creating wide, dusty paths. They devour the tender new growth that might have sprung up. They contaminate the remaining crop with their droppings, rendering it unusable for food. It's total, comprehensive agricultural destruction. You walk out into the field, the dry soil crunching under your boots. The air smells of dust and dry vegetation. The heat presses down. The sound of the emus is all around you now. The rustling, the pecking, the occasional low grunt or hiss. They barely acknowledge your presence. You're just there, an obstacle they can ignore, a giant, slow-moving annoyance. It's frankly insulting. You're the farmer, the landowner, the one who created this field, and they're acting like you're interrupting their picnic. You shout. Your voice sounds thin and reedy against the vastness of the sky and the relentless noise of the birds. They might lift their heads for a second, blink their large dark eyes at you, and then go right back to eating. It's like trying to reason with a particularly stubborn, feathered Roomba that's decided your carpet is delicious. You try waving your arms. You try throwing stones. The stones bounce harmlessly among the thick legs. The emus scatter a little, perhaps moving a few feet away, only to immediately resume their feast. It's a game they've played before, and they're clearly winning. You're a minor inconvenience, a temporary disruption to their meal plan. Think about the scale. A single emu can eat a significant amount of grain in a day. Now multiply that by thousands, 10,000, 20,000. More? The sheer number is overwhelming. Your field, which seemed so vast and promising just weeks ago, begins to shrink under their assault. It's like watching your bank account being drained, cent by cent, but with feathers and a distinct lack of online banking alerts. This is happening across the region. Your neighbors are facing the same onslaught. The reports coming in are grim. Fields being wiped out in days. Fences crucial for keeping livestock in and, well, things out are being pushed over or simply walked through by the sheer force of the migrating flocks. The infrastructure of farming life is crumbling under the weight of nature's particularly large, flightless, and hungry mistake. This period, the early 1930s, is already tough. The Great Depression is biting hard.
For many farmers, especially those who were soldier settlers given land here after World War I, this wheat crop isn't just income, it's survival. They were promised a new life on the land, a chance to build something after the horrors of war. And now, that promise is being devoured by birds. It's a cruel twist of fate, a punchline delivered by the animal kingdom. Historians still argue whether the government truly grasped the scale and severity of the problem in these initial weeks. Was it seen as just another farming nuisance, or did they understand the existential threat these birds posed to the fragile agricultural economy of the region? There's debate about the speed and sincerity of their initial response. There are also quirkier details that emerge from this time. Some farmers tried building makeshift traps, funneling the birds into enclosures, only to find the emus were surprisingly adept at finding weak points or simply running through flimsy barriers. Others tried poisoning, but the sheer numbers made it ineffective and raised concerns about harming other wildlife. One particularly fringe tidbit suggests that some farmers believed the emus were somehow organized, moving with a military-like precision that seemed unnatural, almost strategic. While this was likely just a human projection of frustration onto animal behavior, it speaks to the feeling of being up against a coordinated enemy, not just random wildlife. You watch as another section of your field succumbs. The golden stalks are replaced by a trampled, dusty brown patch teeming with large, gray-brown bodies. The air vibrates with their presence. It's a constant reminder of your powerlessness. Every farmer here is facing the same grim reality. You are losing the battle for your crops. You are losing the battle for your livelihood. You are losing the battle against the birds. The sun begins to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the devastated landscape. The emus don't stop. They forage into the twilight, their shapes blurring in the dim light. The sound continues, a low hum of destruction that will likely lull you into a restless sleep tonight. You retreat to your farmhouse, the image of your ruined fields burned into your mind. The silence inside is jarring after the constant noise of the emus. You feel exhausted, defeated, and deeply, profoundly frustrated. What can you do? What can anyone do against such numbers, such relentless hunger? You cling to the hope that the government, the authorities you contacted, will understand, that they will send help, that they will provide a solution, because standing here, alone, watching your future being eaten, feels utterly hopeless. The emus have breached the walls, and the siege is in full effect. Desperate, you and other farmers plead with the government for help. You stand there, the dust settling around your worn boots, the silence after the emus have moved on, feeling almost louder than the chaos they brought. Your eyes scan the damage. Flattened crops, snapped fences, the ground churned up like a battlefield. It's worse than you thought. Much, much worse. And the feeling in your gut? It's a cold knot of despair. You've fought hard, you've tried everything you know, but nature, in the form of a feathered, flightless army, is winning decisively. What do you do when your livelihood, your future, is being systematically devoured by creatures that seem utterly impervious to your efforts? You do the only thing you can do. You reach out. You need help. Real help. Not just suggestions, not just sympathy, but action. You turn, the muscles in your back aching, and start walking. Not towards the house for a rest. Rest is a luxury you can no longer afford. You walk towards your nearest neighbor, then the next, and the next. The word spreads like wildfire across the parched landscape, a desperate call for unity in the face of a common enemy. You meet in dusty farmhouses, the air thick with the smell of sweat, worry, and stale tea. Maps are spread out on rough-hewn tables, fingers tracing the paths of destruction. Voices are low, weary, sometimes rising in frustration, or falling into moments of stunned silence as someone recounts the latest unbelievable loss. You hear stories that sound like they belong in a tall tale. Emus ramming fences until they break. Lines of birds marching with military precision, their heads bobbing rhythmically as they advance. You nod, because you've seen it too. You've lived it. The collective decision is swift and unanimous. You must appeal to the government, to the authorities in the distant cities who make the rules, who control resources, who, you desperately hope, have the means to tackle a problem of this magnitude. The process is formal, necessary, and feels agonizingly slow. You gather paper, precious, often rough paper, and dip pens into inkwells. There's a focused quiet in the room as hands, calloused from years of working the land, carefully form letters. You describe the situation, trying to find words that convey the sheer scale of the disaster without sounding hysterical. You list the losses: acres of wheat gone, barley decimated, fences destroyed, precious water sources fouled. You explain your own failed efforts, the attempts to scare them off, the makeshift barriers, the sheer futility of trying to fight tens of thousands of large, fast-moving birds with limited means. You emphasize the financial ruin you face. Many of you here, you included, are soldier settlers. You came to this land after the Great War, given blocks by the government as a way to build a new life, to contribute to the nation, to finally find peace after the horror of the trenches. That's a mainstream historical fact, by the way. A lot of these farmers were veterans, making their plight even more poignant, and perhaps giving them a stronger claim on government assistance. You write about the numbers. This is where it starts to sound a bit unbelievable. You estimate conservatively, then you estimate what you think the true number might be. Tens of thousands, maybe more. You describe the horizon, shimmering, not just from heat haze, but from the indistinct, moving mass of the emu flocks. You wonder if anyone back in a comfortable city office will truly grasp the image you're trying to paint. It's like trying to describe a swarm of locusts, but each locust is 6 feet tall and weighs as much as a person. Okay, maybe not that much, but you get the idea. And they don't just eat, they trample. The letters are signed, the ink drying slowly in the dry air. Then comes the next step, getting them to where they need to go, to the state capital, Perth, and perhaps even to the federal capital, Canberra. In this era, communication isn't instant. There are no emails, no instant messages, no frantic tweets with photos of the feathered invaders. You rely on the postal service, on telegrams for urgent messages. Imagine a sound, the clatter of the telegraph machine, translating your desperation into dots and dashes. You picture the journey of that letter, bouncing in the back of a truck over corrugated roads, then perhaps onto a train, slowly, inexorably, making its way across vast distances. And you wait. The waiting is almost as bad as the attacks themselves. You continue your futile efforts on the farm, trying to salvage what little you can, always with one eye on the horizon, one ear listening for the telltale thump, thump, thump of approaching emu feet. Days turn into a week, then 2. You talk amongst yourselves, speculating. Have they received the letters? Do they understand? Or did our description of giant birds sound like the ramblings of sun-mad farmers? You wouldn't be the first to wonder if you were losing your mind out here. Meanwhile, reports from other areas start filtering in. The problem isn't just yours. It's widespread. The emu population, perhaps pushed by drought or simply following ancient migratory paths, that now clash with human settlement is on the move, and they are hungry. The sheer scale of the reported problem starts to become a quirky, almost unbelievable tidbit in itself. Farmers reporting numbers so high they felt they had to be exaggerating. Yet the damage was undeniably real. It's like trying to report a bug in a new software update, but the bug is eating your house, and customer support keeps putting you on hold. There's a modern aside for you. Finally, a response begins to trickle back. Not an immediate solution, of course. Bureaucracy moves at its own pace, especially when faced with something so utterly unprecedented. There are inquiries, requests for more details. Meetings are held in distant, comfortable offices where the most pressing problem is likely a paper jam, not a bird invasion. You hear whispers, rumors. The government is considering options. What options? Fences? More conventional pest control? Someone mentions the military. The military to fight birds? It sounds absurd. But then again, the situation is absurd. Historians still debate whether the government's initial hesitation was due to genuine skepticism about the severity of the problem, a reluctance to allocate resources during tough economic times, or simply a lack of any established protocol for dealing with a pest of this magnitude. There's your scholarly debate phrase. Was it incompetence, indifference, or just plain befuddlement? From your perspective, waiting here on the ground, it feels suspiciously like the first two. You imagine the conversations happening miles away, someone reading your carefully written letter, perhaps stifling a chuckle at the sheer audacity of the problem. Right, so these chaps say giant birds are waging war on them? Sounds like too much sun, eh? You want to scream. You want to grab them by the collar and drag them out here, show them the wreckage, let them hear the sound of 1,000 emus stripping a field bare in hours. But all you can do is wait and hope. You continue to stand sentinel over your damaged land, the dust on your boots a constant reminder of your struggle. You listen to the wind, you watch the heat haze, and you pray that your pleas, carried slowly across the continent, will finally land on ears that will listen and minds that will act. Because you can't fight this war alone. And the emus aren't waiting. They are still out there, just beyond the horizon, perhaps gathering their forces, perhaps simply moving on to the next unsuspecting farm. The siege is ongoing, and you are running out of time. You stand by your fence line, dust coating your boots, the silence of the outback broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant, unnerving calls of, well, you know who. You've sent your letters, you've sent your telegrams, you've practically screamed into the void, begging for help. You feel utterly alone, overwhelmed by a feathered foe that seems to multiply with every passing day. The sun beats down, relentless, and you just want to collapse in the shade. But you can't, not yet. Then you hear it, a low rumble on the horizon. It's not the wind, it's not the shifting sands. It's something mechanical, something heavy, growing steadily louder. You turn, shielding your eyes against the glare. A dust cloud, much larger than anything kicked up by a farmer's ute, billows in the distance. It's approaching your property. Hope, a fragile, almost forgotten sensation, begins to stir in your chest. As the cloud draws nearer, shapes begin to resolve within it. Trucks, military trucks, olive drab, solid, purposeful. They look utterly out of place against the vast, empty landscape. Like someone accidentally dropped a screenshot from a war movie into a nature documentary. They rumble closer, engines grunting, tires churning up the dry earth. You watch, mesmerized, as they slow and finally pull to a halt near your homestead. Doors open, and men in uniform climb out. Khaki uniforms, slouch hats. They look serious, professional. They carry rifles, yes, but you also see something else being unloaded from the trucks. heavier, more menacing-looking equipment. Machine guns. Lewis guns, you recognize them from pictures. These aren't farmers with shotguns. This is the army. This feels surreal. You, a humble farmer battling emus, are now standing here watching the Australian military deploy on your land. It's like calling 911 because you have a spider in the kitchen and SWAT shows up, except, with more dust and fewer tactical vests. You walk towards them, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over you. A tall, authoritative figure steps forward. He introduces himself as Major G.P.W. Meredith. He's in command of this detachment. With him is Sergeant S. McMurray, who seems to be in charge of the actual machine guns. They are here because, surprisingly, the Australian government, under Minister for Defence Sir George Pearce, actually agreed to deploy military personnel and weaponry to combat the emu problem. This wasn't some local militia or a volunteer group. This was an official, albeit slightly bizarre military operation sanctioned at a high level. This is your mainstream historical fact right here. The Australian Army was officially sent to deal with an emu infestation. Major Meredith explains the plan, though his tone suggests he might be questioning his career choices that led him to commanding troops against avian adversaries. The objective is simple: cull the emus, reduce their number significantly so they stop destroying crops. The method? Use machine guns. The military reasoning, as explained to the public, was that this would also provide valuable target practice for the soldiers, especially with automatic weapons, given that the targets were fast-moving and numerous. A convenient way to spin a slightly embarrassing situation, perhaps? You show them the lay of the land. You point out where the emus tend to gather, where they seem to be most numerous. You explain their habits, their uncanny ability to appear and disappear. You try to convey the sheer scale of the problem, the numbers you've seen. The Major listens, nodding, but you can see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He's probably thinking, how bad can a few birds be? Oh, Major, you have no idea. The soldiers begin to set up. They position the Lewis guns. These aren't light little firearms. They're serious pieces of kit, designed for battlefield use. They require a crew, they have complex mechanisms, and they can fire a lot of bullets very quickly. The plan is to use mobility, load the guns onto trucks, drive up to the emus, and open fire. It sounds simple enough on paper, doesn't it? Drive, shoot, problem solved. You feel a surge of optimism. With this firepower, surely they can handle this. You imagine swathes of emus falling, the tide turning in your favor. The soldiers look competent, the equipment looks powerful. But as you watch them, a tiny voice in the back of your head, the one that's been whispering warnings for weeks, reminds you of the emus' speed, their agility, their sheer, baffling resilience. You've seen them shrug off shotgun blasts that would drop a man. Can even a machine gun take them down easily? And how many bullets will it take? Ammunition isn't infinite, even for the Army. There's also the logistical nightmare. The outback is vast. The emus aren't conveniently lined up waiting for target practice. They're spread out, they move constantly, and they spook easily. Getting a truck close enough to open fire effectively without scaring them off first is going to be a challenge. It's like trying to play whack-a-mole with targets that can outrun your mallet. You notice one of the soldiers setting up a gun position near a water source. A smart move, you think. Emus need water, especially out here. They might gather there. But even then, they're cautious. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for this military intervention was genuinely to help the farmers, to provide target practice, or perhaps a mix of political pressure and a desire to be seen as doing something about the crisis. Was it a genuine military operation or a PR exercise that went spectacularly wrong? The debate continues in dusty academic papers and hushed tones at historical society meetings. A quirky tidbit about this deployment: the original plan was to send more guns and troops, but the government scaled it back, perhaps underestimating the scale of the problem or hesitant to commit too many resources to a bird war. They started small, perhaps thinking this would be a quick mop-up operation. Oh, how wrong they were. It's almost like they were trying to fight a full-blown invasion with just a couple of squirt guns. You watch the soldiers. They seem eager, maybe even a little amused by the unusual nature of their mission. Battling birds instead of human enemies. It's probably a story they'll tell for years, assuming it goes well. You hope, desperately, that it goes well. You see Sergeant McMurray checking the belt of ammunition for a Lewis gun. It's a long, heavy belt, full of brass cartridges. Each one represents a potential end to an emu's rampage across your crops. You count the belts, trying to estimate the firepower. It looks like a lot. It feels like a lot. The sun is starting to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows. The air is cooling slightly, but the tension is rising. The soldiers are ready, the guns are ready, you are ready. Ready for this feathered nightmare to finally be over. You look out across your land, across the endless plains. The emus are out there somewhere, unaware perhaps of the military might that has arrived to confront them. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they know. Perhaps they are watching, waiting. Tomorrow the real battle begins. The army versus the emus. You stand on the sidelines now, a spectator to a conflict you instigated. You feel a strange mix of relief, anxiety, and a morbid curiosity. Will this work? Can the might of modern warfare defeat nature's most persistent, most bafflingly resilient bird? You watch the soldiers settling in for the night. They set up a small camp. The smell of cooked food drifts on the breeze, a smell you haven't enjoyed without the underlying anxiety of emu invasion for weeks. For the first time in a long time, you feel a flicker of hope. But the outback night is long, and the sounds of the emus are still out there, a constant, low hum beneath the silence. The war isn't over. It's just escalated dramatically. The morning sun crests the horizon, painting the outback in hues of ochre and gold. You stir from a restless sleep, the sounds of the previous night still echoing faintly in your mind, the distant rustling, the low resonant calls of the emus. But today feels different. There's a new sound on the wind, a low rumble that grows steadily louder. It's the sound of engines. You rise and walk towards the track that leads into the property. And then you see them, a small convoy, trucks, sturdy and khaki-colored, kicking up plumes of red dust that hang in the still morning air. On the back of the trucks you see men, soldiers, and something else, long metallic shapes covered by canvas. They pull up, the engines falling silent with a final shudder. Dust settles slowly around the vehicles. The men disembark, looking around with expressions that range from grim determination to thinly veiled confusion. They are in uniform, though perhaps not the heavy wool you might expect for combat. This is the Australian outback, after all. Still, they look official, professional, armed. A man steps forward, clearly in charge. He's of medium height, with a firm jaw and eyes that scan the landscape with military precision, even as they seem to register the sheer, baffling emptiness of the place. This is Major G.P.W. Meredith, the man the government has sent, the man tasked with leading this operation. You watch as he exchanges brief, serious words with the local farmers and officials who have gathered. The air crackles with a strange mix of hope and skepticism. Hope that this display of military might can finally solve the problem. Skepticism that soldiers, trained to fight people, can truly tackle an enemy that refuses to stand still, doesn't follow orders, and views a machine gun as merely a loud, shiny obstacle. The canvas covers are pulled back from the metallic shapes, and there they are, Lewis guns, heavy, air-cooled machine guns, veterans of the trenches of the First World War. And here's your mainstream historical fact for the section. The primary weapon deployed against the emus was indeed the Lewis gun, a formidable piece of engineering from a very different kind of conflict. You see the distinctive pan magazine sitting ready. Ammunition boxes are unloaded, heavy crates filled with the promise of rapid, sustained fire. This is it, the military solution. Operation Emu, as it would perhaps be informally and perhaps sarcastically known. The plan, as far as you can gather from the hushed conversations and pointed gestures, seems straightforward enough in theory. Find the large congregations of emus, typically near water sources or feeding grounds, and, well, shoot them. A lot. The Lewis guns, with their high rate of fire, are intended to maximize casualties in a short time, before the birds can scatter. You watch the soldiers prepare their weapons, the clink of metal, the dry snap of bolts being checked. They seem competent, focused, but you can't help but notice a certain novelty to their task. They were trained for warfare against human adversaries, for holding ground, for strategic maneuvers against an enemy that, for all its horrors, at least tried to operate with some semblance of military logic. Fighting birds, that wasn't in the manual. And here's a quirky tidbit. There was, unsurprisingly, no established military doctrine for engaging large, fast-moving avian targets. The soldiers were essentially making it up as they went along, trying to apply tactics designed for human infantry to flocks of feathered, flighty opponents. It's like sending a highly trained SWAT team to deal with a really persistent flock of pigeons outside a courthouse. You have the tools, sure, but are you even using them right? Major Meredith gathers his men. He speaks in low tones, pointing towards the horizon, towards the known hotspots where the emus gather in their thousands. You can't hear his exact words, but I imagine it's something along the lines of, "All right, lads, remember your training. Try not to laugh, and for the love of God, make sure those things are actually dead before you move on." Or maybe something more official. Probably more official. There's a brief moment of strategy discussion. Where to go first, how to approach, how to ensure they don't just scatter the moment the trucks are spotted. This is where the lack of established doctrine really starts to bite. Historians still debate whether the initial planning for Operation Emu was adequate given the unusual nature of the enemy and the terrain. Was there real a strategy, or just a hope that overwhelming firepower would compensate for the lack of one? Was it a serious military campaign, or a politically motivated demonstration of action? These are the questions that keep the dusty books open late at night. You feel the tension building. This isn't just pest control anymore. This is a military deployment with machine guns against birds. It's so utterly bizarre, it's almost magnificent in its absurdity. It's like watching a high-budget action movie where the villain is, well, a really determined group of ostriches wearing tiny tactical vests. You know it shouldn't work, but part of you desperately wants to see what happens next. The soldiers finish their preparations. They load the Lewis guns onto the trucks, positioning them for maximum field of fire. You see the gunners settle in behind their weapons, their faces set. They are ready as anyone can be to fight a bird war. The sun is higher now, the heat starting to build. The air shimmers above the dusty ground. A few emus are visible in the far distance, dark shapes moving against the pale landscape. They seem oblivious to the military force assembled here solely for their discouragement. Or perhaps they know. Perhaps they are merely waiting. Major Meredith gives a signal. The soldiers climb into the trucks. The Lewis guns are manned, pointed forward. The engines rumble to life again, a deeper, more purposeful sound this time. You watch as the convoy begins to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed, heading out into the vast open landscape. They are going hunting birds, with machine guns. The dust rises again, a thick red cloud trailing behind the trucks as they disappear into the distance. The sound of their engines fades, replaced once more by the sounds of the outback, the wind, the buzz of insects, and that ever-present, unsettling murmur of the emus somewhere out there. Operation Emu has begun, and you are left standing in the settling dust, wondering if anyone, anywhere, has ever fought a war quite like the one that is about to unfold. It feels less like a military campaign and more like, well, like trying to herd a particularly uncooperative cloud. Or maybe just a really expensive, really loud bird scaring exercise. Either way, it's happening. The men versus the birds. The machine guns versus the feathers. May the best species win. Mini title: First Contact, First Failure. Teaser: you watch as the first attempts to engage the birds prove chaotic and ineffective. You stand there, dust motes dancing in the harsh Australian sun, the silence after the preparations feeling heavier than the noise that preceded it. The air tastes dry, carrying the scent of eucalyptus and anticipation. This is it. The moment the plan, such as it was, is put into action. You are here, in the scrublands near Campion, Western Australia, in early November 1932. The soldiers, led by Major G.P.W. Meredith, are ready. Their objective? Cull the estimated 20,000 emus devastating the local wheat crops. Their primary weapon? Lewis machine guns. Their target? Well, anything that looks like a giant bird. You move with the patrol, your steps quiet on the hard, dry earth. The soldiers are tense, their faces grim beneath their slouch hats. They carry the weight of expectation, not just from the farmers, but from a nation watching, slightly bewildered. It feels less like a military operation and more like a very, very serious pest control job. Imagine sending the army to deal with squirrels in your backyard, but the squirrels are 6 feet tall and can outrun a horse. Yeah, something like that. Soon the call comes, emus! You see them in the distance, a dark, shifting mass against the pale landscape. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of the big birds gathered together, looking for all the world like a feathered, slightly awkward convention. They peck at the ground, oblivious, or perhaps simply unconcerned by the approaching humans. The soldiers fan out, trying to position themselves. The plan is simple. Get close enough, open fire with the machine guns, and mow down as many as possible in one go. It sounds efficient on paper. In reality, you feel a familiar prickle of unease. This isn't a static enemy dug into trenches. This is nature, wild and unpredictable, armed with legs like pistons and brains that seem hardwired for chaos. Major Meredith gives the order. The Lewis guns, heavy and designed for sustained fire against massed infantry or aircraft during World War I, are set up. You hear the click and clatter as belts of ammunition are loaded. The air crackles with nervous energy. Then the first burst. Pra-ta-ta-ta-ta. The sound is deafening in the quiet landscape. It rips through the air, a sudden violent intrusion. You feel the vibrations in your chest. And the emus? They don't stand there waiting to be shot. Oh no, that would be far too convenient. Instead, they explode outwards. Like a shattered vase but made of feathers and panic, they scatter in every direction. Not in a neat military formation you could easily target. No, they run as individuals, as small groups, zigzagging with incredible speed. You watch, mesmerized and slightly horrified. The machine gunners try to swing their heavy weapons, tracking the fleeing birds, but the Lewis gun, designed for a fixed position or a slow-moving aircraft, is cumbersome. Trying to traverse it rapidly to follow a 6-foot bird doing 90-degree turns at 30 miles per hour is, well, it's like trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer while riding a unicycle. It's just not practical. Bra-ta-ta-ta-ta! Bra-ta-ta-ta-ta! More bursts of fire erupt. The sound echoes across the plains. Dust is kicked up by the frantic feet of the emus and the frantic movements of the soldiers. You see birds fall. A few, maybe a dozen in the first few seconds. But for every bird that drops, 50 others are already halfway across the field, disappearing into the scrub. The machine guns jam. Click. Click. The intricate mechanisms, designed for cleaner environments, struggle with the fine dust kicked up by the chaos. Soldiers frantically try to clear the jams, fumbling with hot metal and stubborn parts. Brata! The gun sputters, then falls silent. Another jams. Meanwhile, the emus keep running. They seem to possess an uncanny ability to dodge bullets, or perhaps it's just the sheer luck of numbers and unpredictable movement. Their thick feathers also seem to absorb some of the impact from hits that aren't perfectly placed, acting like feathery bulletproof vests. A quirky tidbit often overlooked is just how tough these birds are. A direct hit was often needed to bring one down instantly, otherwise they'd just keep running, wounded, scattering the flock further. The initial engagement lasts only a few minutes, but it feels like an age. The air fills with the smell of gunpowder and the distant, panicked squawks of birds. When the firing finally stops, you are left in a scene of bizarre anticlimax. The vast majority of the emus are gone, having vanished into the landscape as quickly as they appeared. A few wounded birds might be struggling on the ground, requiring follow-up shots from rifles, which is a slow and inefficient process. The soldiers look at each other, their faces etched with frustration and disbelief. They came prepared for a battle, a clear engagement. They found feathered ninjas who used the terrain and their own agility as their primary defense. It was obvious that the military mind trained for conventional warfare against human opponents was utterly unprepared for this. Emus don't have supply lines to cut. They don't have command structures to disrupt. They don't hold territory. Their strategy, if you can call it that, is simply to exist, eat crops, and run away very effectively when shot at. Trying to apply World War I tactics to this situation is like trying to solve a Sudoku puzzle using only interpretive dance. It just doesn't fit. Historians still debate whether Major Meredith's initial approach was the result of poor planning, underestimation of the enemy, or simply the only feasible tactic given the limited resources and understanding of the problem at the time. Was there any way a machine gun could have been effective against such dispersed, fast-moving targets? Perhaps, under very specific, unlikely circumstances. But not like this. Not in this chaotic, dusty, feathered debacle. The soldiers begin the grim task of tallying the few birds they manage to bring down. The mood is somber. The initial confidence has evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization of the sheer difficulty of the task ahead. This wasn't a victory. It wasn't even a draw. It was a clear win for the birds. They took a few casualties, yes, but they successfully evaded the main assault, scattered the enemy's forces, themselves, and demonstrated the utter futility of the military's chosen method. You look out across the empty plain where moments before there was a feathered army. The silence returns, broken only by the wind and the distant calls of birds that got away. The sun beats down, the dust begins to settle again, and you can almost hear their collective silent cackle on the wind. This isn't going to be easy, not at all. The dust settles slowly around you, reluctant to relinquish its hold on the air. You stand there, the silence pressing in, broken only by the faint, dry whisper of the wind across the scrubland.
The sun beats down, hot and relentless, turning the distant horizon into a shimmering haze. Your eyes scan the empty field where just moments ago chaos reigned. The emus are gone, vanished into the vast, indifferent landscape as if they were never there at all. You look around at the men. They're covered in a fine layer of ochre dust, their faces grimed and streaked with sweat. They're nursing their jammed guns, running oily rags over metal that just failed. There's a palpable sense of disbelief hanging in the air. They came here, trained soldiers with modern weaponry, to deal with a bird problem. And the birds won. At least round one. You can almost hear the quiet collective sigh of frustration. It wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just one faulty gun. It was a complete and utter failure to anticipate the enemy. Because you're starting to realize, deep down, that the problem wasn't just the plan, or the equipment, or even the dust. The problem was the emus themselves. You think about what you saw. Not just birds. No, these are units. Big, powerful, surprisingly fast units. You recall seeing them running, those long legs churning, covering ground at an incredible pace. They can hit speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, which, if you're trying to aim a heavy machine gun from a bouncing truck, feels less like a bird running and more like a feathered bullet train on an unpredictable track. Trying to acquire a target feels less like hunting and more like trying to lock onto a rogue drone during a dust storm. Honestly, you feel like you need better gaming specs for this mission. And they're not small targets, not by any stretch. Standing nearly 2 meters tall, they're imposing figures on the landscape. But their size doesn't make them easy to hit. Oh no, they don't run in straight lines. They scatter like billiard balls struck by a chaotic cue. They zig, they zag. They seem to possess an almost uncanny ability to sense danger, changing direction at the last possible second, just as you think you have them in your sights. It's infuriatingly effective. You watch as the soldiers try to regroup, murmuring amongst themselves. They talk about trying again, perhaps setting up an ambush near a waterhole, but even the thought feels fragile. You imagine waiting, perfectly still, only for a dozen emus to appear, take one look, and decide, nah, we'll find water somewhere else, thanks. They don't seem to play by the rules of conventional warfare, or any rules, really. And the resilience. The resilience. You saw it yourself. Birds taking multiple hits, staggering for a moment, then shaking it off and running away as if they just tripped over a pebble. It's like they're built out of disappointment and stubbornness. Major Meredith, the commander of this operation, would later describe the emus as being almost invulnerable to the machine guns, noting their ability to absorb bullets and keep going. This isn't just a fringe tidbit, it's a mainstream historical fact, acknowledged in official reports. These birds are tough, really, really tough. You lean against the side of the truck, the metal warm beneath your hand. The vastness of the land stretches out in every direction, flat and unforgiving. There's no cover for you here, no trees to hide behind, no hills to use for advantage. Just open plains, giving the emus all the space they need to showcase their Olympic-level sprinting and evasion skills. You, on the other hand, feel exposed, a slow, clumsy intruder in their world. You watch as a couple of soldiers try to pursue a small group of distant emus on foot, rifles slung over their shoulders. It's a hopeless endeavor. Within minutes, the emus are tiny dots on the horizon, and the soldiers are left standing there, chests heaving, the distance already too great. It's like watching someone try to catch a squirrel in a park by simply walking towards it very determinedly. It just doesn't work. The machine guns, while powerful, were mounted on trucks, which meant they were limited to relatively flat ground, which isn't always where the emus decided to hang out.
And even when they could get the guns into position, the vibration of the idling truck, combined with the sheer difficulty of tracking a fast, erratically moving target, made accurate fire incredibly challenging. The Vickers machine guns they were using required water cooling and were heavy, designed more for static defensive positions or sustained fire on large, predictable targets, not for chasing down avian ninjas. This specific detail about the unsuitability of the heavy machine guns for this mobile, unpredictable target is a quirky tidbit that highlights the fundamental mismatch between the military's tools and the task at hand. It's like bringing a tank to a drone race. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds, the wind, the distant buzz of insects, the occasional squawk of a non-combatant bird. It's peaceful, yet beneath the surface there's a tension, a realization that this isn't going to be the simple culling operation that was envisioned. This is a genuine challenge, a war even. And the enemy is proving to be far more formidable than anyone anticipated. You start to wonder if you can call HR and explain that the job description didn't mention fighting kaiju-sized chickens, because that's what it feels like, a bizarre, frustrating, deeply weird conflict where nature itself seems to be actively mocking human efforts. Historians still debate whether the military truly underestimated the intelligence or the sheer resilience of the emus, or if they simply overestimated the effectiveness of their tactics and equipment in this specific environment. Was it hubris, lack of scouting, or did the emus just have an exceptionally good day, or week, as it would turn out? Regardless of the historical debate, standing here now in the quiet aftermath of the first skirmishes, the reality is starkly clear. The emus are difficult foes. They are fast, they are tough, they are unpredictable, and they have the home field advantage in a landscape that seems designed to thwart human efforts. The sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. The men are still working on their weapons, their movements weary. The silent cackle of the emus feels louder now, carried on the evening breeze. This war is far from over, and it's not going to be easy. Not at all. The first rays of dawn paint the sky in hues of soft orange and dusty rose, a stark contrast to the grim reality you face. You've had a few hours of restless sleep, the sounds of the night plains, the rustling of unseen things, the distant, unnerving calls of the emus echoing in your ears. Now the air is cool, but you know the heat will descend quickly, baking the earth and everything on it. You rise with the others, the weariness still clinging to you like the fine red dust that coats everything. Breakfast is a simple, often monotonous affair. Hardtack, maybe some tinned meat if you're lucky, washed down with lukewarm tea. The conversation is minimal, focused on the task ahead. There's no bravado today, just a quiet determination mixed with a healthy dose of apprehension. You saw yesterday what these birds are capable of. Today, the plan is different. You're not just chasing them with rifles. Oh no, the big guns are coming out. You see the crew preparing the machine guns, their movements practiced, but heavy with the knowledge of what they're up against. Specifically, you're dealing with Lewis guns. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The Lewis gun was a pretty standard piece of kit for the time, a light machine gun widely used in World War I. It was designed to chew through infantry lines, not flocks of oversized, feathered sprinters. It's a reliable weapon, in theory, but every tool has its intended purpose, and you're starting to suspect this isn't it. You move out, the vehicles rumbling across the uneven ground. The sun is climbing now, the air warming rapidly. You scan the horizon, your eyes squinting against the growing glare. And then you see them. A dark, undulating line on the distance, hundreds, maybe thousands of emus gathered in a loose formation.
It looks less like a military target and more like a very disorganized, very tall, very feathery parade. The strategy is simple, at least on paper. Get close enough, open fire with the machine guns, and mow them down in droves. Easy, right? Like shooting fish in a barrel. Except the barrel is the entire Australian outback, and the fish are genetically engineered, incredibly fast, bullet-resistant birds who have clearly read Sun Tzu. You approach carefully, the dust billowing behind the trucks. The emus don't panic immediately. They watch you. You can almost feel their collective gaze, curious, perhaps even a little contemptuous. It's unsettling. They start to shift, a ripple moving through the flock. The order is given. The machine gunners brace themselves, their fingers tightening on the triggers. And then, the world is filled with the rapid staccato thump, thump, thump of the Lewis guns. Bullets stream towards the mass of birds. But the emus, they don't stand still. Not for a second. As soon as the firing starts, the formation explodes outwards. It's not a panicked stampede in one direction, it's a chaotic starburst scattering. Birds dart in every direction, their long legs blurring, their bodies surprisingly agile. You watch, transfixed, as the machine gun fire seems to tear through empty air more often than not. A bird might go down, its long neck collapsing, but for every one that falls, dozens sprint away, disappearing into the scrub or behind distant trees. It's like trying to hit individual raindrops in a thunderstorm with a garden hose. You just can't keep up. And then the problems start. The dust. It gets everywhere. It coats the mechanisms, works its way into the moving parts. You hear the firing falter, the thump, thump, thump becoming an irregular thump, thump, click. The guns are jamming. The machine gunners curse, fumbling with the cooling fins, trying to clear the stoppages. This is where that reliability comes into question. While generally robust, the Lewis gun could be prone to jamming in dusty conditions if not meticulously maintained, and let's be honest, battlefield conditions in the outback are not exactly conducive to meticulous maintenance. It's like trying to get your old printer to work when it's covered in a layer of flour. Just not happening. So, you have machine guns designed for static or slow-moving targets, being used in dusty, rough terrain against incredibly fast, erratically moving targets that immediately scatter upon being fired upon. The result? A massive waste of ammunition and minimal impact on the emu population. One quirky tidbit from this period involves the sheer resilience of the birds. There are accounts, perhaps slightly exaggerated but persistent, of emus taking multiple hits and still running, sometimes for considerable distances before finally collapsing. This wasn't just tough hide, their physiology, with vital organs relatively small and protected within a large body cavity, combined with their speed and ability to absorb impact, made them surprisingly hard to bring down with a single shot from a distance. It made you wonder if they were secretly wearing tiny, invisible Kevlar vests. The day wears on, a frustrating cycle of spotting a group, attempting to close in, the emus scattering, the machine guns firing mostly at dust and empty space, and then the inevitable jams. The soldiers become increasingly demoralized. They came here to expect a straightforward call, a necessary if unpleasant task. Instead, they find themselves outmaneuvered, outrun, and frankly, outsmarted by birds. Historians still argue whether the primary failure of this initial campaign was tactical or logistical. Was it the wrong approach to use machine guns against such targets? Or was it the difficulty of getting the vehicles close enough over the terrain, the communication issues, the sheer vastness of the area, and the limited ammunition supply for the scale of the problem? It's probably a bit of column A and a bit of column B, served with the side of never underestimate a determined bird. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon again, casting long, mocking shadows, you look back at the day's efforts. The ground is littered with spent cartridges, but the number of fallen emus is disappointingly, frustratingly small. You've expended thousands of rounds. The birds? They're still out there, watching, waiting, probably gossiping about your terrible aim. The sound of the emu's calls seems louder again in the twilight. It's not just a natural sound anymore. It feels like a taunt, a feathery, derisive laugh carried on the wind. The weapons designed to win wars against human armies are proving almost useless against nature in its most chaotic feathered form. You came here to hunt. You're starting to feel like the one being hunted, or at the very least, thoroughly outplayed. The war is definitely not going according to plan.
The twilight deepens around you, staining the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading orange. The calls of the emus, those ridiculously large birds, seem to echo with a newfound confidence. It's not just the natural sound of the bush anymore. It feels like a deliberate, mocking sound carried on the cool, dry wind. A feathery, derisive laugh that follows you back to the makeshift camp. The weapons designed to win wars against human armies, cold, hard steel and rapid fire, are proving almost useless against nature in its most chaotic, feathered form. You came here to hunt. You're starting to feel less like the predator and more like, well, like you've just spent 3 days trying to assemble IKEA furniture with missing instructions and a wobbly Allen key. Completely outplayed and thoroughly frustrated. The war is definitely not going according to plan. You make your way back to the cluster of tents and vehicles. The mood is heavy, thick with unspoken disappointment. The dust settles slowly, coating everything in a fine red film that clings to your clothes and grinds between your teeth. You can hear the low murmurs of conversation, the clinking of mess kits, but the usual rough camaraderie feels muted. There's no triumphant recounting of successful hunts, no boasts of marksmanship, just the quiet acknowledgement of a difficult, baffling reality. Major Meredith, the man in charge, looks weary. The crispness of his uniform seems a distant memory. It's now as dusty and crumpled as everyone else's. Reports are being compiled, numbers crunched, and the numbers, they aren't good. Despite expending thousands of rounds of ammunition over these first few days, the estimated kill count of emus is frustratingly low, somewhere in the range of just a few hundred. When you consider the sheer number of birds involved, those vast, moving brown rivers you saw, it's barely a ripple. It's like trying to empty a swimming pool with a teaspoon. The problems are manifold, and they quickly become apparent in the tired conversations around the campfire. The machine guns, the Vickers guns, designed for sustained fire on stationary or slow-moving targets, are simply not suited for this. The emus are too fast. They scatter at the first sound of the engines or the first shot, breaking into smaller, unpredictable groups. You try to herd them, driving the vehicles toward them, hoping to force them into a tight group for a clear shot, but the emus are surprisingly adept at evading. They zig and zag, they split up, they disappear into the scrub with astonishing speed. It's less a military operation and more like herding particularly uncooperative, feathered race cars. And the terrain itself is a major obstacle. The ground is rough, uneven, covered in tussocks and hidden holes. Driving a vehicle, let alone trying to mount a heavy machine gun on it and fire accurately, is a jarring, bone-rattling experience. The guns jam, the recoil throws the aim off wildly. The dust, omnipresent and insidious, works its way into the mechanisms, fouling everything. It feels like the land itself is conspiring with the birds. You're fighting an enemy that knows this territory intimately, that can use every dip and rise, every clump of bush to its advantage, while you're struggling just to keep your footing. You listen as Major Meredith discusses the situation with his officers. The frustration is palpable.
They tried ambushes, setting up the guns near water holes or fences where the emus were expected to congregate, but the emus seemed to learn quickly. Or perhaps it was just chance, but they often avoided the danger zones. They tried driving them, as mentioned, but the birds were too agile. The strategy, based on conventional military thinking, concentrate fire, overwhelm the enemy, is simply not working against this dispersed, mobile, and surprisingly resilient foe. Word is sent back up the chain of command. The reports detail the difficulties, the speed and evasiveness of the emus, the unsuitability of the weaponry, the challenging terrain, the low kill rate despite the high expenditure of ammunition. This isn't just a minor setback, it's a fundamental failure of the initial approach. The media, which had initially reported on the operation with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, is starting to shift its tone. There are whispers of ridicule, questions about the competence of the military in handling such a bizarre situation. A mainstream historical fact emerges from these reports. The first week of operations in November 1932 was widely considered a failure, with a disproportionately low number of emus killed compared to the resources and ammunition used. This fact would become a central point in the public's perception of the Emu War. There's also a quirky tidbit circulating. Apparently, one of the biggest issues wasn't just hitting the emus, but stopping them. Even when hit by bullets, these tough birds would often keep running for a surprising distance before collapsing. Their sheer resilience was unexpected, adding another layer of difficulty to the task. It wasn't enough to just wound them, you had to effectively incapacitate them on the spot, which was incredibly hard with a machine gun firing at a rapidly moving, unpredictable target. It was like trying to take down a boss in a video game that just wouldn't acknowledge your hits. As the reports make their way back to the capital, the political pressure begins to build. The Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce, is facing questions in Parliament about the cost and effectiveness of this strange military intervention. The public, already dealing with the hardships of the Great Depression, isn't keen on seeing taxpayer money literally shot at birds with so little to show for it. The initial lightheartedness surrounding the operation is quickly evaporating, replaced with embarrassment and criticism. Historians still argue whether the military strategy was fundamentally flawed from the outset, or if the operational difficulties encountered in the field, the specific behavior of the emus, the terrain, the equipment issues, were simply insurmountable obstacles that couldn't have been fully predicted. Was it a bad plan, or was it just impossible? It's a debate that continues to flap around the edges of this peculiar historical event. The decision is made. It comes down from the higher-ups. The first campaign is to be terminated. The troops are to retreat. It's a quiet, understated order, but its meaning is clear. You failed. The military, tasked with solving a farmer's problem, has been effectively defeated by a flock of birds. It's a bitter pill to swallow. The pride that came with being part of a military operation, even one as unusual as this, is replaced by a sense of deflation. You came out here with machine guns, symbols of modern warfare, expecting a straightforward cull. You are leaving having been thoroughly outmaneuvered by creatures with brains the size of walnuts, but legs like pistons and an uncanny knack for survival. They simply existed in a way that made the most advanced tools of human warfare ineffective. The process of packing up is swift and silent. Tents are taken down, equipment is loaded back onto the trucks. The rhythmic thud of mallets on tent pegs sounds less like work and more like the quiet closing of a chapter. The dust rises again as the vehicles are started, creating hazy clouds in the pale morning light. There are no fanfares, no formal ceremonies, just the quiet, efficient motions of retreat. As you climb into the back of a truck, you look out across the landscape. It seems empty now, the vast plains stretching out under the enormous sky. But you know they are still there, the emus, hidden, dispersed,
perhaps even watching from a distance. You feel a strange mix of frustration and grudging respect for these creatures. They didn't fight back with weapons, but they fought back with their very nature, their speed, their toughness, their sheer numbers, and their refusal to conform to military expectations. They simply existed in a way that made the most advanced tools of human warfare ineffective. The truck begins to move, the wheels crunching on the dry earth. You watch the camp fade behind you, the site of a brief, strange skirmish that will likely be remembered more as a punchline than a battle. The feeling of defeat hangs in the air like the lingering dust. You are withdrawing, tail feathers tucked firmly between your legs, leaving the emus as the undisputed masters of the Western Australian plains. At least for now. The rumble of the truck is a dull, persistent ache beneath you as you pull away from the site of your recent, let's call it, strategic withdrawal. The dust follows you like a reluctant ghost, clinging to the air long after the vehicle has churned it up. The sun, already sinking towards the horizon, casts long, mocking shadows that stretch across the empty plains, hinting at the vastness that defeated you. You lean back, the worn canvas seat rough against your uniform, the smell of petrol and dry earth thick in your nostrils. There's a quiet tension in the air, a shared understanding among the men that this wasn't exactly the glorious victory envisioned back in the comfortable offices of the government. Word of the initial skirmishes, or perhaps more accurately, the emu's successful defense, travels fast. News reports, often tinged with disbelief and a healthy dose of mockery, begin to filter back. The idea that the Australian military, fresh from the triumphs of the Great War, could be outmaneuvered by a flock of large, flightless birds strikes many as inherently absurd. You can almost hear the chuckles back in Sydney and Melbourne. The Emu War is quickly becoming a national joke, a feathered fiasco. But out here on the sun-baked plains of Western Australia, the problem isn't a punchline. It's a very real, very damaging reality for the farmers. Their crops, their livelihoods, are still under siege. The emus, undeterred by the military's brief and ineffective foray, continue their relentless march, devouring grain, flattening fences, and generally making a nuisance of themselves on an industrial scale. The government, though perhaps slightly red-faced, finds itself still under pressure from the farming community. Something has to be done. Again. So, despite the initial setback, despite the bruised egos and the public ridicule, the decision is made to launch a second attempt. It feels less like a bold military campaign this time, and more like a quiet, almost sheepish necessity. No grand pronouncements, no fanfare. Just a quiet order given. A return to the dust, and the heat, and the birds. You find yourself back in the truck, the Lewis gun mounted once more, the familiar weight of the ammunition drums a dull comfort. The air is still dry, but perhaps a little less scorching than before. It's later in the year now, November turning into December 1932. The landscape hasn't changed. The same endless horizon, the same hardy scrub, the same deceptive stillness that can explode into feathered chaos in an instant. Major Meredith is here again, his expression perhaps a touch wearier, but his resolve, or at least his professional obligation, still intact. The tactics are subtly different this time. Less emphasis on trying to herd vast flocks into kill zones, which proved laughably ineffective. More focus on smaller groups, targeting emus as they move through specific areas, trying to catch them unawares near water sources or feeding grounds. It's less of a pitched battle and more of a persistent, grinding effort. Think less D-Day and more like, well, still something involving birds, but maybe like trying to win an argument with a particularly stubborn pigeon. You move slower this time, The truck rumbling along dusty tracks or sometimes simply forging its own path across the open ground. The sound of the engine is a constant companion, a low thrumming vibration that travels up through the chassis and into your bones. You scan the horizon, your eyes squinting against the glare, searching for those telltale dark shapes that ripple and shift in the distance. The heat still presses down, but there's sometimes a slight breeze that whispers through the open windows of the truck, carrying the scent of dry grass and something wild and untamed. You spend hours like this, patrolling, observing, waiting. It's a test of patience, a slow game of hide and seek where the hiding places are vast, and the seekers are in a metal box that announces its presence from miles away. When you do spot a group, the process is still the same. The truck bumps and lurches as it tries to close the distance. The Lewis gun is swung into position. You brace yourself, the familiar weight of the weapon heavy in your hands. The birds, however, seem to have retained their uncanny ability to sense danger. At the first hint of pursuit, they scatter, their long legs propelling them across the ground at surprising speed. It's like trying to catch greased lightning, if lightning wore feathers and had a penchant for agricultural destruction. This second campaign, unlike the first, is less about grand gestures and more about attrition. You fire, you aim, you try to lead the running targets. The stuttering roar of the Lewis gun breaks the silence of the plains. Spent casings ping and clatter around your feet. Sometimes you see a bird stumble, perhaps fall. More often, they simply run faster, blending back into the shimmering heat haze, disappearing into the vastness. The sheer scale of the landscape works against you. The plains stretch on forever, offering countless avenues of escape for the birds. You might engage a group, fire off a burst, and then watch as the survivors melt away, leaving you feeling like you've barely made a dent in the problem. It's a frustrating, repetitive cycle. You learn to read the landscape, to anticipate where the birds might be, near patches of water, scarce at this time of year, or where the grain crops offer an irresistible buffet. You see the evidence of their passage everywhere: flattened fences, tracks in the dust, the telltale signs of their feeding. The enemy is everywhere, and nowhere all at once. One quirky tidbit you might notice is how the emus seem to learn. Not in a strategic military sense, of course, but they adapt their behavior. They become more wary of the truck, scattering sooner. They seem to recognize the danger associated with the noisy metal beast. It's almost as if they held a feathered committee meeting after the first attempt and decided on a new dispersal strategy. The mainstream historical fact is that this second phase, which lasted through November and into December 1932, was significantly more successful in terms of the number of birds culled, though still far from eradicating the problem. Major Meredith reported killing several hundred emus, a much higher tally than the first attempt. You feel the reality of this in the moments when your aim is true, the brief, violent interruption to the quiet plains. Yet historians still debate whether this second attempt was genuinely more effective due to improved tactics, or simply because the emus were concentrated in certain areas due to the dry conditions, making them slightly easier targets. Was it skill or just luck and circumstance? The days blend into a rhythm of driving, searching, brief bursts of intense, frustrating action, and then more driving. The sun rises, climbs, and sets, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a starkly beautiful backdrop to this strange, low-key conflict. You eat dusty rations, sleep under the stars, and wake up to the vast, indifferent sky. The feeling of being a very small part of a very large, slightly ridiculous problem persists. You continue the patrol, the truck rumbling on, the dust billows behind you,
The horizon stretches out endlessly ahead. The emus are out there, somewhere, living their lives, utterly unaware of the historical footnote they are becoming. And you are here, participating in this quiet, persistent, slightly absurd second act of the Great Emu War. You continue the patrol, the truck rumbling on. The dust billows behind you. The horizon stretches out endlessly ahead. The emus are out there, somewhere, living their lives, utterly unaware of the historical footnote they are becoming. And you are here, participating in this quiet, persistent, slightly absurd second act of the Great Emu War. The sun beats down, warming your skin through the rough fabric of your uniform. The air is dry, carrying the scent of baked earth and something faintly wild, maybe saltbush, maybe just the vast emptiness itself. The sound of the engine is a constant drone, a mechanical heartbeat in this ancient landscape. You feel the vibration through the seat, a low hum that settles deep in your bones. It's a feeling that becomes familiar, this constant movement across an unchanging stage. This second phase, which officially kicked off in mid-November 1932, is different from the first chaotic attempt. There's less fanfare, less media attention. The initial shock and novelty have worn off, replaced by a grim determination, or perhaps just a weary resignation. The plan is simpler. Small groups like yours patrolling specific areas known for high emu concentrations. You're mobile, attempting to catch the birds off guard. But the emus, oh, the emus. They haven't read the military manuals. They haven't received the memo about standing still and being easy targets. They are dispersed now, not gathered in their previous thousands. They are in smaller mobs, sometimes just dozens, sometimes even fewer. This makes targeting them with the Vickers machine gun incredibly difficult. You scan the horizon, your eyes squinting against the glare. The world shimmers in the heat haze, making distant objects dance and distort. Is that a clump of bushes, or are those dark shapes moving? Your heart gives a little lurch. You tap the driver's shoulder, pointing. The truck slows, the engine note dropping. You raise the binoculars to your eyes. Just bushes. And maybe a few kangaroos bounding away in the distance, looking far more graceful than the emus ever could. You let out a slow breath, a little sigh of disappointment mixed with relief. The anticipation is almost worse than the action itself. The patrols are long, monotonous hours, punctuated by brief, frantic moments of potential engagement. You might spot a mob half a mile away. The driver accelerates, bouncing over the uneven ground, dust streaming behind you like a comet's tail. The gunner in the back braces himself, the heavy Vickers swinging on its mount. As you get closer, the emus see you. They don't panic in a useful, stampeding towards you kind of way. They scatter. They break into smaller groups, running in different directions. They are surprisingly fast, their long legs pumping, covering ground with an effortless loping stride. Their bodies are narrow when viewed head-on, offering a minimal target. You try to get the gun to bear. It's heavy, unwieldy in a moving truck bouncing over ruts and bumps. The gunner struggles to track the darting birds. The vibrations make aiming a nightmare. You hear the staccato burst of gunfire, a harsh, ripping sound that seems alien in the quiet vastness. Dust kicks up around the running birds. You see feathers fly sometimes. A few birds stumble, but most keep going, disappearing into the scrub or over a low rise. It feels like trying to shoot individual grains of rice with a fire hose while riding a unicycle on a trampoline. Utterly ridiculous and profoundly inefficient. You pull up, the truck idling. You look out at the empty landscape where seconds ago there were dozens of birds. Maybe one or two are down, twitching in the dust. Maybe none.
The expenditure of ammunition versus the confirmed kills is depressing. You don't need to be a mathematician to know this equation doesn't balance. This pattern repeats day after day. You drive, you spot, you chase, you shoot, you mostly miss. The emus are learning too. They become warier, scattering sooner. It's like they've developed a sixth sense for the dusty green truck and the loud metal box on the back. There's a quiet frustration that settles over the men. You came out here to solve a problem, to help the farmers, to show these feathered fiends who's boss. Instead, you're engaged in a never-ending game of whack-a-mole, except the moles are giant, fast, and seemingly bulletproof. One day, you hear a story about a soldier who swore he saw an emu duck behind a bush just as he fired. Probably just heat stroke or wishful thinking, but it adds to the legend of the emu's uncanny ability to evade. It's a small, quirky tidbit in this otherwise monotonous campaign, a whisper of the sheer, almost supernatural elusiveness of the enemy. The official reports start to paint a picture, but maybe not the one the military brass back in comfort were hoping for. By early December 1932, after weeks of this second phase of operations, the number of reported kills is still low, very low, considering the resources being expended. Estimates vary wildly, depending on who you ask and how much optimism they've had for breakfast. Some claim a few hundred birds, others fewer. The official tally is murky, a number debated even at the time. Historians still argue whether this second phase was more effective than the first chaotic ambush attempt. Was the mobility an advantage, or did the scattered nature of the emus make it inherently futile? It's a point of contention, a small footnote in a large, strange story, but one that highlights just how perplexing this whole situation was. You start to notice things beyond the immediate task. The way the light changes in the late afternoon, turning the dust golden. The strange alien shapes of the termite mounds. The vast, silent scale of everything. You are a tiny speck, and the emus are slightly larger specks, all existing in this immense, indifferent space. It feels less like a war and more like an exercise in futility, set against a beautiful, desolate backdrop. Morale isn't exactly sky high. It's hard to feel like a conquering hero when your primary enemy is a bird that looks permanently surprised and runs away at the first sign of trouble. It's less charge and more like, well, guess they got away again. If this were a video game, you'd be complaining about the hit detection and the enemy AI's unfair dodging ability. You might even tweet something sarcastic about it, if Twitter existed and you had signal out here. You don't. The reality is sinking in for everyone involved, from the soldiers on the ground to the commanders trying to make sense of the reports. This isn't working. The cost, the ammunition, the fuel, the time, the sheer embarrassment is mounting, while the results remain negligible. The emu problem for the farmers persists, largely unaffected by the military's efforts. The decision comes quietly, without fanfare. Sometime in early December 1932, the order is given. The operation is to be wound down. The military presence is no longer required. You pack up the Vickers gun, dismantle the mount from the truck. It feels less like the end of a campaign and more like giving up on a particularly frustrating home improvement project. Yeah, maybe we'll just live with the leaky faucet for now. You drive back, not in triumph, but in a dusty, weary convoy. The landscape still stretches out around you, vast and silent. The emus are still out there, living their lives, having successfully defended their territory against human intervention, armed with nothing but instinct and an impressive turn of speed. The Great Emu War, in its official military capacity, is over. It didn't end with a bang or a surrender or a peace treaty signed by a particularly large emu wearing a tiny hat. It ended with a quiet withdrawal, an admission, unspoken but clear, that the birds had won. Or perhaps more accurately, the humans had failed to win. The problem remains for the farmers, of course. The emus didn't magically disappear, but the military solution proved ineffective, even slightly comical in retrospect. You are leaving the region, heading back to barracks, leaving the farmers to figure out their own way to deal with their feathered neighbors. The dust settles behind your departing truck, erasing the temporary tracks of this peculiar conflict.